Hello guys and welcome back. Today we're taking a look at a fascinating article by The Athletic identifying the biggest need for all 32 NHL teams. And I've been told this one has some pretty fascinating takes and good looks into what teams are looking for ahead of this NHL trade deadline. What could be the biggest need for your favorite NHL team at the deadline? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through this full article with all of my thoughts as well. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content and trade deadline content as we lead up to the deadline this year. Now, starting out this article, we got the Anaheim Ducks, and their biggest need for the deadline, according to Eric Stevens, is a bona fide sniper. Saying the Ducks are nearing the point where they need to acquire talent that can help them now instead of solely eyeing on the future. Well-stocked in defensive prospects and are already eating NHL minutes. It's enough that Henrique dealed Jamie Drysdale to get Cutter Gauthier, but it's time to identify a scorer who still has valuable years ahead of him. Not easy to acquire, but you've got to kick the tire. Of course, that description would have perfectly fit a player like Alex DeBrincat last year, but Detroit's definitely not trading him. I also think Andrei Kuzmenko could fit that bill, but considering, of course, division opponents, I doubt that's realistic. Anthony Mantha might not be the most appetizing option, but considering he's done pretty solid in the goal-scoring department this year with 14 goals in 41 games, we know Pat Verbeek loves big boys. Could be an option here with term that Anaheim might covet. Let's keep going though, from Eric to Hatchek saying for the Arizona Coyotes, help at center. He says they have already one of the weakest collections of center icemen in the NHL, even when they did have Hayton and Boyd without those injuries. We're talking about wish list stuff. A first or second line center should be at the top or the organization's shopping list. The only real options I can really see is maybe a Mikael Granlund as a trade. He's been really underrated with San Jose this year. You can see 29 points in 38 games. Maybe if they want to go for a younger presence, they go out for a Morgan Frost, who seems to be pulling up his trade value. 22 points in 37 games. Been great as of late, but there's very thin options here for the Yotes, and they can just stay patient and wait for Logan Cooley to become that guy. For the Boston Bruins, they say a top 6 wing, depending on Pastrnak and Marchand to score. They can't really expect the same from anyone else. None of them are proven offensive threats. And people have been talking about Elias Lindholm for a long time, but really the most likely option to me is Adam Henrique, who at 33 years old as a rental, I think would fit the Bruins game perfectly. Keeping the game simple, can be physical here and there, and he still can't produce 29 points, 15 goals in 46 games this year. I think the Bruins are going to be all over him. In the biggest duh of all time for the Buffalo Sabres, a top 4 defenseman, no wonder when they added Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson last season, it wouldn't be enough. And who knew also that relying on a 22-year-old goaltender to become a star in this first year in the NHL also wasn't going to work out. If we're talking about fits though, the guy I would be going after if I was Buffalo is Trevor Van Riemsdyk, who at 32 years old, 6'3", big size, but can still produce. And with $3 million on his deal for the next 2 seasons afterward, he's signed to a pretty good term, but defensively, he's been solid for Washington this year and has been just a solid presence on that top 4 for a very long time. To me, it wouldn't fix their defense necessarily, but he'd be a much better ad than a Clifton or a Johnson, that's for sure. From Julian McKenzie, the Calgary Flames, draft picks and prospects, this doesn't really surprise us. The Flames need to go in a retooling direction, in my opinion. The writing is on the wall, and hopefully they finally listen to Flames fans that have wanted that for so long. Then we go on the Carolina Hurricanes, and this was interesting from Corey Laviolette saying defensive depth. Now, sure, they've been pretty solid in goal scoring this year, but I still don't buy it. Come playoff time, we've seen time and time again how that scoring has dried up. To me, they could use somebody to bring some offensive punch. Again, Vladimir Tarasenko would be perfect in my opinion. But if we're talking about defensive depth like Corey mentions, I think Zach Bogosian could be a pretty interesting ad. Of course, as a Stanley Cup winner, proven commodity there. He's not the greatest defenseman in the world, but as a depth D who at worst could be your 7th guy, I think there's much worse options, and you could probably just get him for like a 5th round. For the Chicago Blackhawks, Mark Lazarus says trade partners in dire need of cap space. To me, this is what any NHL rebuilder should be doing with the cap space they have, bringing in some cap from the contracts and being a 3rd-team broker, getting a couple of draft picks here and there. It just makes way too much sense. I could see them being a 3rd-team broker in a Adam Henrique deal or maybe even a Jake Allen deal if it comes to it. Speaking of the devil, here we go to the Colorado Avalanche. Jesse Granger saying a veteran backup goalie. Now, for me personally, I think that second line center spot is a much bigger need. Even though Ross Colton has looked solid over the past couple of weeks, I still think they need a bona fide second line C who can provide some great offense as well as a dual threat game. Elias Lindholm could be that type of guy. We'll see. But I think they could absolutely go for a second line center. But a backup goalie has been a big need for them too. I think Colorado actually, especially if we were to see a 3rd team come in and get rid of some of that cap on Allen's deal, could be one of the few teams that actually wants the term on Allen's contract. Being, of course, a solid backup over the past couple of years, he can provide some stability to Georgiev, who has had some rough moments this season, being relied upon consistently Allen could really leave off the pressure and make sure Georgiev's a lot better rested for the playoffs. This one also makes sense from Aaron Portzline to clear lineup roster space with the Columbus Blue Jackets. I mean, they have so many different guys that they could end up getting rid of, and a lot of just mid. It's a lot of okay guys, a lot of decent players. Nothing, though, that's gotten a ton of trade interest, which is why they haven't been traded yet. Saad Yousuf with the Dallas Stars coming in and speaking the truth, a legitimate top 4 defenseman. Yes, thank you. Please. It is so blatantly obvious that Yanni Hakanpää and Ryan Suter have not been getting the job done. And even though Esa Lindell, thank goodness, has been okay this year, it's just not good enough, man. To me, the guy that absolutely makes the most sense is Nick Seeler from the Philadelphia Flyers. Big, solid, consistent defenseman who's cheap on a 1-year deal, could be a rental, and would be exactly what Miro Heiskanen needs on that right side. You could put Heiskanen back on the left side where he naturally belongs, and please, dear goodness gracious, Jim Nill, please do this. Going on to the Detroit Red Wings, Max Bolton actually suggests going for a defensively responsible forward, and honestly, I don't quite disagree. I mean, he mentions how you could go for a defenseman, but it's already pretty logjam there, which I also agree with. To me, one name that could make sense, besides the term, is Garnet Hathaway. The problem is he signed to that long-term extension, and I really don't know if Detroit's going to want to bring on that $2.3 million past this year, but in terms of actual player fit, I could see him being a pretty solid option on that fourth line defensively. I could also see if they want to go for a bigger player and really make a serious upgrade. Adam Henrique, like we mentioned before, will be a pretty good option there too. And this article was actually made before the Corey Perry deal, and as Daniel Nugent-Bowman says, a middle six winger, well, Corey Perry is pretty much perfect and playoff perfect as well. Now, I like this one as well. For the Florida Panthers, Sean says forward depth, and this is something that I actually really agree with. Florida right now is looking very, very good, but I think they could especially use a third line center, especially once Barkov is back. It would give them so much more stability on all 4 lines. The player that to me makes so much sense is Sean Monahan. We already know that the Habs and the Panthers have had trade history in the past, of course, with the Big Ben Sherratt deal. And I think with Florida, they're really going to like Monahan in a solid face-off third line center role. And even though defensively, I don't think he's going to be perfect by any means, I think he'd bring much more stability and, again, a lot more balance throughout the lineup, and offensively can pack a nice offensive punch, which I think in that bottom 6, they could absolutely use more of. And here we go. The LA Kings, he says, a scoring winger, saying, if I were mean, I'd say a do-over or a don't do on the PL Dubois trade. He also says there's been a fast-growing fan contingent that believes a new head coach is the real need, but with the scoring drought that's starting to plague the whole team in a recent tailspin, the need for another forward who can finish changes has been exposed. Now, I actually agree with this, saying with Victor Arvidsson potentially coming back, that could be a potential fix. Maybe not a complete fix, but I think it could be good enough. I think some of us in the hockey world, honestly, just kind of underrate Victor Arvidsson still at this point and what he's been able to do. I mean, last year he got 59 points and got 7 points as well in 6 playoff games with LA. And again, that type of offensive boost could be exactly what LA needs. Now, we got from Michael Russo here at the Minnesota Wild, a defenseman. It's been quickly becoming fashionable in Minnesota to say sell and play the kids. Sell what and what kids? Saying that there's a lot of potential additions that could be happening, but also saying there's a better reason to stop running Brock Faber into the ground. He's been overused the past month out of necessity. Now, to me with Minnesota, it's kind of hard to really suggest anybody. Maybe an Andrew Peeke in Columbus could be the answer, but defensively, he's taken some steps back recently. Also has some term that I'm not sure Minnesota will be able to handle all that easily. With the Montreal Canadiens quality draft picks, we know, of course, that they're going to likely end up trading Sean Monahan. We hope that there might be some other potential trade options, but Monahan will likely get the biggest trade package back. And here we go here with the Nashville Predators saying secondary scoring. When an opponent can take away the Preds' excellent top line of O'Reilly, Forsberg, and Nyquist, the opponent is virtually home free. I agree. And again, I think Nashville is one of these teams over the next year will make some massive additions. Maybe if they are looking for a rental, Anthony Duclair could be a fit on that middle 6, another underrated scorer that could be really interesting given more ice time and just a better team around him. But really, I think Nashville's going to be active no matter what. They have a great prospect pool that could leverage some pretty good players back. Then we go on to New Jersey, and the main need is a goaltender. Yeah, we know this. Even though I think they could also still use a defenseman right now, goaltending has been brutal. They need somebody. Now, there's really not a lot of options that come cheap. Maybe Capo Kakinen is an option, but again, how much of that is an upgrade? Even if he has done pretty solid, especially recently with the Sharks this year, getting a 902 save percentage. There were some rumors about Marc-Andre Fleury, but at this stage in his career, I really don't think he'll be able to salvage your team. An 897 save percentage, he's been below average this year, and probably won't even waive his no trade clause either. Honestly, I have no clue what New Jersey ends up doing because really, there's not a lot of options out there that could really solve their problems 100%. For the New York Islanders, our first staple ends up talking about a spark, even though they've hired Patrick Waugh, wanting something more on top of this. I'm not really sure what they would go for, but it could be interesting. I could really see them going after Adam Henrique, but if they want a cheaper trade option, I could see Tyler Johnson being a fit. Of course, 2-time Stanley Cup champion, and I think he could still be good in a maybe goal-scoring bottom 6 role. 9 goals in 35 games with Chicago this year could maybe be a fit here. We'll see. With the New York Rangers, a top line or middle 6 forward, this one also makes sense. Really, somebody to be on that first line with Kreider and Zibanejad is almost a must at this point. Maybe an Andrei Kuzmenko could be interesting, but again, he's played left wing most of the time, and I think that transition onto the right might be a little bit harder, easier said than done. And this year, of course, hasn't had the greatest results. Maybe they trade for Vladimir Tarasenko again. That would be pretty wild, but again, I doubt it's going to end up happening. Now, an interesting one here for the Ottawa Senators, a right shot defenseman from Ian Mendez saying on the left shot defenseman side, you got Shabbat, Chychrun, Sanderson, and Brandstrom in the regular lineup, and could use a right side D to kind of balance it out. And I completely agree here. You could have Artem Zub on the bottom line if you're able to get somebody that could play on that top line with Sanderson, and it would provide just so much more depth throughout that defense and just make it a lot better, honestly. Now, we talked about Trevor Van Riemsdyk, and I could see that also as a fit, but one name that really strikes me is Dante Fabro. I don't know why Elite Prospects has Roman Yossi's picture here, but with Fabro at 25 years old, he's a guy we've heard kind of in a little bit of trade rumors with Nashville recently, and has put up some good defensive results in the past. Last year, I thought was really solid. This year has been just okay in that regard, but I think in Ottawa could be really interesting in the prime of his career and could turn a page in a better situation for him. Kevin Kerr suggests for the Philadelphia Flyers another first-round pick. This makes a lot of sense, and considering the options they have in trade rumors this year, they might not get an actual first-round pick, but they could get a first-round pick's worth of it, maybe a couple of seconds when it's all said and done. Now, Rob Rossi ends up suggesting for the Pittsburgh Penguins a top 4 defenseman, saying, full disclosure, this is the assumption that Kyle Dubas holds on a Jay Gensel, which feels like a 50-50 bet at this point. But he says with the underperformance of Ryan Graves, supposed to be the top pairing D with Chris Letang, he's flip-flop with both Letang and Carlson. A suitable partner for Carlson could also help his performance, which has waned in recent weeks. One name that I think could really work out is Mario Ferraro, a guy that has been in trade rumors over the past really year or so. But even though he's undersized, he brings a solid, consistent defensive game. Nothing that's going to overwhelm the opponent, but just his study and quiet in that department. And I think could really be interesting in Pittsburgh's defense. Of course, with San Jose being on that horrible D-core, he's tried his best, but I think in Pittsburgh, it could rejuvenate himself to be on a much better team. Maybe even Jamie Alexiak could be a fit. Of course, former Pittsburgh Penguin. We know the size, we know the physical and defensive presence, and that's what Pittsburgh might need in the end. Then going on to the San Jose Sharks, and this was an obvious one, more draft capital. I mean, they got so many guys that they could end up trading that, aren't overwhelmingly good, but could provide some value, and I think San Jose could have kind of a little bit of a sneaky deadline this year. I don't know why I went so squeaky with my voice, but you know what I mean. Then we got Thomas Drance talking about the Seattle Kraken needing scoring depth and size, saying that Joey Daccord has revitalized the goaltending side of things, and even though they've had the additions of Thomas Tatar, it hasn't been able to alleviate some of the depth issues, which I can kind of agree with. But to me, I look at the top end of the Seattle Kraken team, and you're just kind of disappointed by the scoring. Jared McCann has had a down year. Jordan Everly has just kind of been fine. Same thing with Jaden Schwartz. Matty Beniers offensively has not been able to put up the results that he should. To me, I think they could be a contender for one of the strongest players in this entire trade deadline. And even though they're in the same division, don't count out the Seattle Kraken in the Lindholm race. I could absolutely see them going after him as a rental to kind of rejuvenate that top 6 and just make it a lot more competent come playoff time if they were to make it. For the St. Louis Blues, Jeremy Rutherford ends up suggesting a top 9 forward, saying that he could get started on his off-season work early, but it would be wise to find a top 9 forward or 2. One name that I could see making sense is Scott Lund, potentially. We've heard his name a little bit, but I feel like with Philly, it's kind of been so-so. Obviously, this year, there's been a lot of struggles in his own department. Only 5 goals in 48 games, but he has been playing better as of late offensively. We know the physical, the defensive instincts that Lund brings, and I think St. Louis could really admire that. Now, this one is interesting from Shauna Goldman saying, for the Tampa Bay Lightning defensive depth, Tampa Bay needs more than it can afford considering its cap situation. At most, management can swing some low-key moves to round out the roster. Defense was a weakness compared to years past coming out of the season, and injuries have amplified that. Honestly, defense was already an issue last season, and it's still continuing to be one. To me, though, the name that makes the most sense is Nick Seeler, who will maybe provide a little bit of a battle between Dallas and Tampa Bay. But again, considering his low cap hit, I think it's like $775K. That is perfect for Tampa Bay. And considering the defensive acumen that he has, he'd be perfect alongside a player like Victor Hedman at this stage. And again, provide some stability that really Tampa doesn't have a lot of right now. Going on to the Toronto Maple Leafs is defense still, and I completely agree here. I mean, defense has been a rough problem this year, and I would say defense was honestly not that big of an issue maybe a couple years back when players like Brody and Muzzin were still at a great pace and Giordano was still playing great. But now, since those guys have either left the roster or are just at the worst in their careers, defense has again continued to be a necessity. On to Vancouver, and this one's interesting. A second line center. This Canucks team has taken off since its big line, Miller, Pettersson, and Besser at the top of the lineup. So far, the depth has held its own with the club's top two centermen on the same, but come playoff time, the club may need more robust options down the middle, particularly given the center depth of Vancouver's key Pacific Division rivals. And you look at it, and yeah, Vancouver might need that, considering, of course, you got the top end guys on the first line, but really center-wise, besides that, really bona fide third line that's now had to be a second line. That's been a little bit of weakness. Maybe they go after Lindholm, maybe they go after Monahan. Those would likely be the two best bets. From Jesse Granger talking about the Vegas Golden Knights needing a middle six forward. When healthy, the Golden Knights don't have many weaknesses in their lineup, but if there's one thing I could see them looking to upgrade at the deadline, it's their depth scoring. Now, the big thing here I want to also mention is the fact that Vegas has $6.3 million in deadline cap. So this isn't a team that is totally strapped for bucks and will be needing to go for a cheaper guy. They could even go for a Vladimir Tarasenko if they want. Then on the Washington Capitals, this one also makes sense. Future assets in the team. We know that they're kind of in a weird retool, recycle type of situation, but I think younger players, getting those options, getting those younger presences on the team, like they mentioned here with Sean Gentile, I think really makes sense. Go after more guys like Connor McMichael, Alexi Protas, who are giving you so much more than a lot of those veterans on the team right now. Then we go to the last team to talk about here, and the Winnipeg Jets, a second line center to lean on. This one is pretty fascinating because you look at it, and obviously Scheifele is out, so that's going to change once he is back, but you likely have Vladislav Nemestikov as your second line center, and offensively, it's worked out pretty well. He's been pretty solid for them, but face-off wise, he's about 37% this year. Maybe they want to go for a more stable force at center. Do not be surprised if they go after a Sean Monahan. Again, solid face-off ability and offensive punch that could really maximize potential. But also don't be surprised if they go after Scott Lund, a more defensive presence. Face-off ability isn't quite at Monahan's level, but still okay. And again, that defensive and physical presence, I think Winnipeg would really like to have in that middle six. But those were the Athletics' top needs for all 32 NHL teams, and there were some that I disagree with here and there. I think, again, a team like Colorado might need a second line center more than a goaltender right now, but for the most part, I agree with these, and again, this deadline is going to be really interesting. You have top dogs that are going to get a lot of interest, like Monahan and players like Nick Seeler. We'll see how teams adjust after those guys are dealt, but it's going to be a wild one in a race for those really hot commodities. So let me know in the comments down below, what did you guys think about this athletic list? Did you agree with it? Did you disagree with it? What did you think about your team's biggest need? Is it the biggest need? Do you agree with that? And who should your team trade for at this year's deadline? Let us know all your thoughts down below. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you guys enjoyed the breakdown. And of course, share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. And click on this card for all my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan, and I hope you have a fantastic hockey day. Have a great one, and goodbye.